this post on REDH made me so happy because I finally have somewhere to put the deck that I've been thinking of building for the longest time. And look, I know many Commander players out there, y'all have your own backlog to build through. I personally have mine, but this is a top 3 just because of how unique it is and just the theme around it. So let's go to the post and see if I can answer this player's question by going through one specific commander. Maybe y'all can help me build it here. So what are some commanders that interact with the table a lot? Looking at my deck pool earlier, I came to a realization that they're all extremely one-track helmet decks. Most of them are either stompy combat decks or combo decks that are insulated by a bunch of protection. Whilst they do have some spot removal and wipes, they don't really interact with my opponent and their cards much. They just do the old thing and win or don't. So I'm looking for a new commander, someone that is either interaction in the command zone or someone who incentivizes rewards running a lot of interaction in the 99. I want to hold on mana, have a response. I want to be able to remove threats easily. I want to be flexible. I want to play on other people's turn, not just my own. What's the deck I'm looking to build? Budget isn't really a concern, thank you in advance. Now, a lot of people talking about, oh, this is a tough one, you know, talking about all these decks, you know, we see Yawgmoth, Bellow. Bellow's actually a low-key crazy deck, by the way. This deck absolutely does busted things. But look, there is one commander that should come to everyone's mind. There is only one, in my opinion, and that commander is Marchesa, Dealer of Death. This card is so good. I've been a Marchesa fan for a hot minute. I'm a lover of Marchesa, okay? Marchesa, Dealer of Death, Grixis colors for a 3/4 human rogue legendary. Whenever you commit a crime, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Now, what I like about that ability, so forget the crime part for a second, because that's the thematic part. What I like about the ability of looking at the top 2, that gets around like the card draw stuff. So if you have things that your opponents are using against you, maybe like a Narset Partner Veils, this card doesn't draw you cards. Although there will be card draw in the deck, this commander specifically doesn't draw you cards. It just gives you a little bit of selection, fills your graveyard a little bit, adds to your hand. It just gets around some very unique parts of anti-interaction that people might traditionally have for a Grixis strategy. Now, whenever you're looking to commit a crime, you may pay 1. So committing a crime is targeting opponents, anything that they control, and or cards in the graveyards is a crime. That to me is the quintessential form of interaction. You are literally taking abilities, pointing them at your opponent's stuff, which is interacting with your opponent's stuff. In the literal definition of the word, this is interacting with things. And what I wanted to do in this video is go through, you know, some of the cards that have always been at the top of mind for myself building this commander, and what are some ways that we can maybe maximize this. And if you have any suggestions down below, heck, even for an alternative interactive commander or cards that could probably go into this, I would love to hear it, because I would love to hear, you know, the collective mind instead of just going on EDH Rec and picking the best cards out there. These are ones that have always been around. I probably already have copies of these somewhere. I just had them on a list over time. And so I don't know. I don't know if y'all are the type of people that when you're building, you just have an active list and you keep adding to it over time. You're like, oh my God, this would be great in this deck. You open up like a Google Doc and like you throw it in there. Anyway, first card that obviously has to go in here, Mayhem Devil. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, whenever a player, could be fetch lands, could be tokens on their side, could be tokens on your side, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So you sacrifice something. If I sacrifice, like if I have some type of Phyrexian altar nonsense going on right now, I believe maybe I'm misspelling that. The artifact that whenever you sack it, you gain some, sack something, you gain some amount of mana, sack 1 thing at a time, deal 1 damage to a target. You're committing crimes. I love that. You're committing crimes. You are interacting. You're interacting. Your commander wants you to do that. So I love that off of Mayhem Devil. Bloodthirsty Blade is like actually premium, because this is 1 mana, interact with your opponent. Attach Bloodthirsty Blade to target creature an opponent controls. Activate only as a sorcery. So you're not going to be able to, you know, kind of do this over and over again. It's not at like instant speed, which is a little unfortunate, but it's a good way to just like equip onto a creature and goad it in a different direction. So it's committing a crime. Your opponent is then going to be able to give it back to you, but then you get something goaded off. You do this as a sorcery. And so they will have to spend mana to maybe take it back. Maybe they want the boost, whatever it is. There's some political actions going on here, but I like this just as committing a crime. You get that extra boost out of something like Bloodthirsty Blade. The next one is kind of a bigger payoff for the deck. Hullbreaker Horror. This spell can't be countered, flashed, great. We generally know this card, right? Whenever you cast a spell, return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand. So if you don't control it, it's got to be your opponent's spell. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, so that could be yours, but then it could also be your opponent. So it's got to be non-land. You can bounce their creatures, you can bounce their mana rocks, their enchantments, whatever it might be. And that's whenever you cast a spell. So if you have Hullbreaker Horror as a big payoff, you're casting a bunch of spells like Ops and like just cheap things. Hullbreaker Horror is just going to be able to commit crimes, allow for some selection or some graveyard feeding, depending on what you're looking to do. So Hullbreaker Horror is great for that. Next up is a more expensive option, but honestly just a no-brainer to me. Orcish Bowmasters. Flash whenever it enters, whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw each turn, Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target. So if your opponent casts a Brainstorm, that's 3 individual triggers for the Orcish Bowmasters. And that's 3 individual crimes being committed, quote unquote, for free, passively on your opponent's turn, likely. Okay? Didn't want to rhyme there, but I got there. Dealing 1 damage not only to your opponent's life, but to their creatures. The more they draw, the more value you get out of this. Orcish Bowmasters is just passive value in this deck, being able to create so much kind of passive crime there. Virtue of Persistence I have in here because it's 2-pronged. You're filling your graveyard, so there is like a soft like reanimation angle you probably want to take just to get value out of certain creatures. There's probably some flashback cards you want to be playing, but this card's great because on the front side on the sorcery, target creature gets -3/-3, so you're immediately committing a crime off the front side, and then off the back side, it's an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, which is another set of crimes. So not only is this a reanimation for you, you can bring back your stuff, but then the trigger on the enchantment itself is a crime that you can commit by targeting a creature out of your opponent's graveyard. So really a big fan of cards like this. Reanimation is going to be key in this deck. Wheels, card draw, a lot of interaction, but weaving in things that serve multiple purposes is obviously how you built a really nice and cohesive commander deck. So I'll have to shout out Virtue of Persistence for that. Next one is Anger. This one's pretty simple. This is the type of card that, again, you always want in your graveyard. You might be playing Wonder as well. I'm forgetting what the black one is. If there is a black one, I've never really played it. Wonder and Anger have always been at the top of mind for me. But as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So that's really nice. If you're able to reanimate something, that's always going to have haste. When you kind of pay that one to do that like top 2 selection, you're always going to put Anger into your graveyard. You're always going to pick the other card to put into your hand. Obviously there might be a situation where you do the other way, but regardless, this is a great way to just, if you can't find your Anger, you don't have a way to put it in your graveyard, you can just keep going and going and going. Eventually that Anger will go into your graveyard. This is just an auto include for me. And in certain builds, I would imagine Wonder is just to get like over top, depending on how you build. But Anger just feels like an auto include based on like the general scope of how I feel like this deck should, or at least how I would build it in general. So Anger is great there. The last section, I kind of want to go over cards that just like easily commit crimes, right? For like almost for free, right? So Unnatural Selection, 2 and 1 for an enchantment. Choose creature type other than wall. Target creature becomes that type until the end of the turn. So you could just choose Orc, right? Or I don't know, Goblin, and target an opponent's creature over and over and over again. So this is essentially a 2 mana quote unquote card selection engine. So you pay 1 to target a creature, then because you committed a crime, you pay the other one off Marchesa, you fill your graveyard, you draw a card. So this deck is obviously going to have a lot of good value out of like infinite mana. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind, right? Because it's generic mana that you have to pay. If you create infinite colorless mana, which actually is relatively easy to do, then you can use that with cards like this to commit crimes, draw out your whole deck, feed out your whole graveyard, and you could probably figure out something really good to do even with infinite colorless mana. You probably have some type of sync for it. Unnatural Selection is great for that. Again, the natural just interacting with your opponent in the literal sense in this commander. Hex Parasite, artifact creature, Phyrexian Insect. This had like a very good stint in Modern for a while. I'm not sure if a lot of commander players relatively know about it, but Phyrexian, and X. Remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0. So a permanent can have 0 counters. It doesn't matter. You're still targeting that permanent. This obviously isn't naturally free. It's not mana. This is life, but you could play black, pay black. So if you had infinite black mana, you could use that. But life is a resource. You have 40 of it in Commander. You might as well be using some of it to commit some crimes and interact with your opponent. Obviously, if there are situations where your opponent is trying to use counter synergies, they're trying to put a bunch of counters onto things, you can grow your Hex Parasite really big. It's a relatively easy thing to deal with. It's a 1-drop creature for a 1/1 that you grow eventually, but it's also an artifact. I get that, but again, a free, if you think about it, as life as a resource, it is a free 2-life commit a crime. I'm just saying, for two life, you get to interact with your opponent. Come on. The last one is just like an all-star in this deck. I feel like there can't be a single version of Marchesa that I can think of that would not be running Eater of the Dead. This has to be the most free card out there. Untap Eater of the Dead, remove target creature card in a graveyard from the game. Fam, you're gonna be killing something. Someone out there is going to be milling something. Someone out there is going to be sacking something. Like somehow, some way, a creature is going to enter the graveyard. This does not, notice how the 0 ability, even errated, if Eater of the Dead is tapped, right? So it has to be tapped and then you untap. So it has to be tapped. So you probably swung in, maybe you're maybe you're using this to pay for some type of cost as part of tapping it. Exile target creature card from a graveyard and untap Eater of the Dead. You know what's great about this? You can activate this an infinite amount of times. When it's tapped, yes, you can exile and tap it. This is a very good card in Phenax because you can tap it, mill your opponent, they mill some type amount of creature, you pay 0, exile that creature, untap, tap, go, like it's a very good combo piece in Phenax. That's why I have a copy of this. But the other reason is the fact that it commits free crimes. If you have infinite mana, then this is a great way to not only sink in and create a bunch of crime triggers, but then use those crime triggers to draw out the rest of your deck and create some type of win from there. This is just another payoff for that. Another way to just create crimes. If you attack in, you can then untap this, commit a crime, have it out as a blocker or something, and just continue to have free value. This is a deck that, again, continues to just interact with your opponent's board. Your opponent cannot complain. You are doing what every other player wants you to do. You are interacting at all points in the game. You are interacting, you are targeting your opponent, you are targeting their creatures, you're targeting stuff in their graveyard. And this is exactly why I think Marchesa is the only commander. And you know what? It should be the #1 commander. Maybe people can come up with other commanders. I'd be really surprised if there was another one. But I remember reading this post and I just bazinga. I was like, yo, this is the commander I've been meaning to build for a hot minute. Marchesa has to be the answer to this question. What are some commanders that interact a lot? Marchesa got to be peak. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If Marchesa actually is the answer to something like this. And if you have other commanders, as I mentioned, you have other cards that maybe should go into Marchesa. Help the Hive Mind needs to help me build this commander deck eventually. And I don't know, let me know if you want me to do videos on more commanders that I've been meaning to build. I would love to go through my backlog and kind of talk through it. I'm a real big fan of like unique commanders that do like cool, funky things. Do I want to build all of them? Yes, but like I realize it's not logical because like sometimes you build a commander deck for a gimmick and like you play the gimmick once or twice and then it gets boring. So I kind of like play through it like that. But if I ever had the opportunity and like funds weren't an issue, you know, you had infinite money, I'd have them all built. So if you wanted to see videos on those, I'd love to make them. But I'm so happy this is just a line. I wanted to get this out there. I don't know where to end the video. Let's end it there. Thanks everyone, and keep on interacting with your opponent.